Subcommittee on Financial Services and General Government will come to order. This hearing is titled the Budget Hearing of the Office of Management and Budget. Members will have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to thank Director Vought for being here today. The Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, plays a central role in most of the decisions made in the executive branch, particularly as it relates to the federal budget. It's also important to remember that OMB is an office created by Congress. In 1921, the Congress passed the Budget and Accounting Act of 1921, which created the Bureau of Budget under the Department of Treasury. Later in 1939, in the Reorganization Act of 1939, the Bureau was relocated to the newly created Executive Office of the President. And in 1970, Congress approved the Bureau's renaming to the Office of Management and Budget. I mention this history because OMB plays a unique role both as an office created by Congress and one that has been and continues to be responsible for fulfilling the President's policies. In fact, over the last 100-plus days, OMB has played a central role, not just in the reconciliation negotiations or recent budget submission, but in the reshaping of the federal government. As of May 27th, 157 executive orders, 39 memoranda, and 62 proclamations had been signed by the President. OMB plays a critical role in each of these decisions. But as appropriators of the federal government, we need to work with OMB to ensure that funds are being used as Congress intended. That is why the President's budget is so important. This is a guide to helping Congress understand the agency priorities and how the legislative and executive branch can work together to deploy the resources necessary to execute these priorities. Last Friday, federal agencies, including the Executive Office of the President, sent up their budget requests for fiscal year 2026. OMB is requesting $146.1 million for the next fiscal year, a 13.3% increase above its FY 2025 enacted level. I look forward to discussing OMB's FY 2026 request with you today, Director, and how we can work together to ensure agencies have the resources they need to work on our priorities for our constituents and the public at large. I now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Director, candidly, Director Vought, I think your agenda is a danger to our country, our Constitution, our people, and one that marginalizes the Congress and Article 1 to establish an imperial presidency. That's exactly the opposite of what our founders had in mind. What this administration has done under your direction mirrors what you did during Trump's first term, what you wrote in your Project 2025 chapter, and what you said in a 23 speech, 2023, to members of the MAGA right. You had it quoted to you many times. As you probably know, I represent over 70,000 federal employees. A highly offensive statement. We want the bureaucrats, which is so often used as an epithet, not a descriptor, to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they're increasingly viewed as villains. We want their funding to be shut down. Were the thousands of doctors, scientists, and cancer researchers Doge fired from NIH villains? The more than 800 employees Doge dismissed from NOAA, people who track hurricanes and protect Americans from storms, were they deep state agendas? What about the food inspectors, intelligence officers, national park rangers, first responders, and countless others purged by this administration? They're just patriotic Americans trying to serve their country. All received an email seeking their decision to leave the federal service, 2+ million of them. What sort of message does that send? I think of a Marylander named Caitlin, who worked at the Center for Medical and Medicaid Innovation. After spending weeks agonizing over whether Doge would fire her, she died of suicide back in February. I think of another Marylander, Monique, who worked for the Social Security Administration. She was forced to pick up more work as many of her colleagues took the buyout or were fired by Doge. The stress grew and grew until, sitting at her desk in February, she died of a heart attack. Her friends and family are certain it was triggered by the stress she was under at work. No business on earth could treat employees like this and expect efficiency to improve or their enterprise to succeed. There is no doubt efficiency has gone down. Backlogs have grown at the Social Security Administration, the VA, and other agencies. Federal employees now have to spend hours filling out paperwork just to order basic office supplies, something that used to take minutes. One of the first things OMB did after Trump took office was pause all federal loans and grants. That froze thousands of infrastructure projects that were already under construction across the country, an action taken with no regard or no awareness, perhaps, of the consequences of those actions. The Trump administration has traumatized Americans, not just federal employees, reduced efficiency, broken the law, and trampled on Congress's authority. And for what? We have every indication that Doge will cost taxpayers more than it's going to save. Director Vought, you're going to play an even larger role in these efforts now that Elon Musk is reportedly leaving. This committee isn't going to ask you to summarize your work in 5 bullet points or write essays to pass a loyalty test. We expect you to address the concerns of the American people. They have questions. I have questions. We owe them answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ranking Member DeLauro, for her opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Joyce, and thank you, Ranking Member Hoyer, for holding this vital hearing. Director Vought, good afternoon. Welcome back to the House Appropriations Committee, and thank you for appearing before us today. The Office of Management and Budget is perhaps the most critical agency that most people have never heard of. I know you know this well, Mr. Vought, but that is no excuse to thwart and otherwise ignore the law. In the United States of America, if you disagree with a law, you have every right to urge that that law be changed. You can petition or meet with lawmakers, and you can wage a campaign in the court of public opinion. You can run to become a lawmaker yourself. What disagreement with the law does not confer is license to ignore the law, to flagrantly violate the law, and to act as though you are completely above the law. This administration, instead of being laser-focused on the cost of living crisis, it is actually making that cost of living crisis worse. And it has put billionaires in charge of the government and has filled the ranks of civil servants with political allies. For the sake of eliminating accountability and cutting taxes for billionaires, this administration is unlawfully impounding or stealing funds and dismantling agencies, depriving the American people of the programs and services which Congress has created, authorized, and appropriated funds for. You posit yourself a defender of everyday Americans and a champion for restoring an imagined version of America you consider morally and virtuously superior to the country we actually live in. I do not believe your actions, which are inflicting direct harm on the people you claim to support, is in any way reflective of righteous values or of America's constitutional tradition. You support autocracy, not restrained or limited government. You have shown nothing but utter disregard and disrespect for this committee, for Congress as a whole, and for the laws that we have enacted. When the president named you to retake this position, he said that you would, quote, return self-governance to the people, end quote. Yet, you have demonstrated contempt for American taxpayers by gleefully ignoring lawful requirements to provide them and their elected representatives in Congress the most basic information as to how their tax dollars are being spent. During your current tenure, the president has yet to submit a full budget. When it finally arrives, you will have led the most delayed presidential transition for any OMB in history. Despite your shortcomings at OMB, you fashion yourself the acting head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You have been very busy there, but so far your biggest achievement has been increasing at least 45 million Americans' credit card bills by hundreds of dollars annually by reinstating predatory fees. You have ignored requests from this Congress for information. You stood up the Republican leadership of this committee, several of whom are here today. And you have mocked the Government Accountability Office for affirming what everyone in this room understands to be true. You are unlawfully impounding or stealing congressionally appropriated funds. Director Vought, the Constitution confers the power of the purse, the power to make appropriations in law, to the Congress. It is right there. It's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. The courts have repeatedly ruled that there is no inherent authority for the president to impound funds. The late Justice Antonin Scalia, not a liberal torchbearer, proudly proclaimed, as much in reference to the Supreme Court's decision in Train versus City of New York. Justice Kavanaugh, then for the D.C. Circuit, wrote, and I quote, "Even the president does not have unilateral authority to refuse to spend." And Chief Justice Roberts, during his time at the White House counsel's office, stated, and I quote, "No area seems more clearly the province of Congress than the power of the purse." Let me just go back to our founding fathers on the Congress's power of the purse, to Alexander Hamilton. And I quote, "Where the purse is lodged in one branch and the sword in another, there can be no danger." You are not just on thin legal footing, Director Vought. You are living in a legal and historical fiction. You envision a king unbound by laws who rules by decree, who accepts lavish gifts from foreign governments, who fills public offices with ultra-wealthy and political allies, and who expels opposition and crushes dissent. This view of presidential authority could not be more un-American and more dangerous to our constitutional order. You contend that there are over 200 years of historical practice to support your position. This is a lie and fiction. I have reviewed your pseudo-history, and nearly every instance you claim supports your position of a president king, unbound by the American system of checks and balances, is either irrelevant or an exercise of discretion explicitly granted by the Congress in law. Presidential impoundment power is a myth. You do not just have to take my word for it. The Constitution, the courts, Government Accountability Office, and the American history would tell us you are breaking the law. Through the OMB funding freeze, which touched communities nationwide, you have attempted to seize control of the government and impound funds far beyond what is permitted by law. And in venues across the country, the courts have broadly, unequivocally told you, quote, "No, you do not have the authority. You cannot unfreeze unilaterally funding across the government that has been appropriated by the Congress." The courts are making clear that you grossly overstepped your authority. You have had your day in court, and the courts have rebuked you. They have said no, no, and no. None of this is surprising. Project 2025, which you co-authored, laid out your blueprint for concentrating absolute power, not just in the White House, but in your own hands. Your colleagues, secretaries, and heads of major agencies have testified before us in the last several weeks to exactly this point. Your office has promoted your own goals over and above the people President Trump has handpicked to run his administration. You have also said that you want to traumatize federal employees, civil servants, as if inflicting trauma and creating a culture of fear and doubt will somehow make this government more efficient. Mr. Vought, be honest. This is never about government efficiency. In fact, an efficient government, a government that capably serves the American people and proves good government is achievable, is what you fear the most. You want a government so broken, so dysfunctional, so starved of resources, so full of incompetent political lackeys and bereft of experts and professionals that its departments and agencies cannot feasibly achieve the goals and the missions to which they are lawfully directed. Your goal is privatization, for the biggest companies to have unchecked power, for an economy that does not work for the middle class, for working and vulnerable families. You want the American people to have no one to turn to but to the billionaires and the corporation this administration has put in charge. Waste, fraud, and abuse are not the targets of this administration. They are your primary objectives. I thank you, I thank the chair for his indulgence, and we look forward to your testimony. I yield back.
Well, I thank you, Ranking Member DeLauro, yielding back the 3.5 minutes that went over, but that's that.
Thank you
understand.
for your indulgence.
Today, we welcome the testimony of the Honorable Russ Vought, Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Director Vought, without objection, your written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we'd ask you to please summarize your opening statement in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Hoyer, for inviting me to testify today. Over the past 4 months, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, has worked tirelessly to deliver on President Trump's promise of a federal government that works for the American people, not bureaucrats and the entrenched establishment. Under the previous administration, government spending aggressively turned against our citizens, who saw their tax dollars used to fund cultural Marxism, the Green New Scam, foreign projects unaligned with American interests, and even our own invasion. Every agency became a tool of the left. Under President Trump, those days are over. The President's fiscal year 26 budget, in tandem with the One Big Beautiful Bill and other tools this administration has at its disposal, will finally end the era of unchecked federal spending, stop the weaponization of government, and turbocharge economic growth. The fiscal year 26 budget puts American citizens first and shifts the destructive paradigm that ruled Washington for decades, that we could only fund national security and border security if we massively funded woke and weaponized bureaucracy coveted by the left. The President's budget reduces non-defense spending by $163 billion, 22% below current year levels and the lowest non-defense spending since 2017 if adjusted for inflation, all while we protect funding for national defense, homeland security, veterans, seniors, law enforcement, and infrastructure. Over 10 years, such restraint would generate trillions in savings necessary for delivering on the President's goal of balancing the budget. The budget also incorporates the historic increases for defense and border security that will be provided by the One Big Beautiful Bill currently making its way through Congress. In combination with base appropriations, the bill is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to revolutionize our nation's defense capabilities and protect our American sovereignty, providing the first-ever trillion-dollar defense budget and the single largest investment in border security in our nation's history. The bill also improves our fiscal trajectory by reducing mandatory spending, as confirmed today by CBO, by roughly $1.7 trillion, the largest mandatory spending reduction in history, ending waste, fraud, and abuse, and preserving critical programs. Along with the extension of President Trump's 2017 tax cuts and the new tax policies provided for additional relief to working and middle-class families and our seniors, the bill will drive massive economic growth and raise GDP, increasing wealth across the board. OMB's fiscal year 26 budget request as an agency is critical to supporting this comprehensive fiscal strategy. The full request is $155.776 for OMB. OMB, as you all know, is a personnel-intensive agency. We are only asking for 20 additional FTEs, which would bring us from 500 employees to 520, and an additional 2 FTEs in one of our offices funded through the ITOR account. I will note that OMB's request is substantially below the increase requested by the legislative branch's GAO. OMB's funding has remained essentially flat since fiscal year 23. By contrast, under GAO's request for fiscal year 26, the agency would receive an overall increase of 17% over 3 years. As I've said many times, the civil servants at OMB are among the most resourceful and innovative our country has to offer. They are not only of great value to the taxpayer, but the whole nation. OMB has been hard at work crafting the President's budget, implementing this administration's fiscal goals, in accomplishing the largest deregulatory agenda in our nation's history. With the president's budget, the One Big Beautiful Bill, historic tariff revenue, and the recently transmitted $9.4 billion rescissions package, our deregulatory efforts, and other key tools, this administration is implementing a comprehensive strategy to improve the nation's fiscal state. Only the Washington, D.C. that benefits from the status quo Americans know that instinctively. They elected President Donald Trump to fix it, and the task ahead of us is great, but this administration, including OMB, is committed to working hand in hand with our partners in Congress, this committee, to finally deliver for the American people. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your opening statement. I now would recognize myself for 5 minutes, but as I asked for all, we'll try to make sure we stay on the 5-minute timeline so everyone here has an opportunity to ask their questions and get them answered. And possibility exists then to get to round two. We'll certainly allow for at least a second round lightning of a question each. To get there, we have a hard stop of 4:10. Okay? Director Vought, in the President's fiscal year 2026 budget request, OMB is requesting what you had just said, a 13.3% or $17.1 million increase for the fiscal year 2026. This increased funding would support, quote, unavoidable costs in investing in OMB's workforce, among other priorities. Would you explain what those unavoidable costs are and why OMB needs to restore staffing levels that were previously reduced? And why is OMB's need for more staff different than staffing needs in any other agency?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the reality is we've held constant for many, many years at the 500 level, even though the size of government has increased. And so, when I was in the position in the first term, I had the view that OMB should reduce its headcount. And the challenge that we found when we did that, when we pursued budgets that did not prioritize the analysis that OMB needs to do, you find yourselves in a situation where some of your key resource management offices are having to analyze programs and agencies that are growing exponentially larger. Just to give you an example, our previous resource management organization for national security had the veterans, it had all state and foreign aid, it had the entirety of the Defense Department, it had the entire intelligence community, and if you look at it compared to across the agency, you didn't have enough analysts to be able to do the job. Similarly, we're being asked to do quite amount of work with regard to the President's deregulatory initiatives, and that will continue to be a priority through OIRA. That's one of the reasons we're going to need additional FTEs when it comes to being able to staff that up, not unlike what you would see with our increases for border security or USTR with the work that the President's doing to get more rational trade deals on the books. So in terms of unavoidable costs, just because you have the same amount of staff doesn't mean that you don't have things like tech support and the work that's required to keep all of our systems up and running. And there's a lot of expenses that goes with it. But I truly believe, and I think you all believe this too because of the resources that you've given to GAO, that it's paramount to have enough analysts that can grapple with the size and scope of the federal government. And I think that pound for pound, an OMB career FTE is one of the most important from a standpoint of being able to address that need to be able to deal with our fiscal health as a country and get cost-benefit analysis and a regulatory framework that makes sense for the country.
I want to focus on Executive Order number 14158, issued on January 20th, 25, is titled Establishing and Implementing the President's Department of Government Efficiency. Executive Order establishes the United States Doge Service, or USDS, and within the reorganized USDS, a U.S. Doge temporary organization that is authorized through the 4th of July of next year. Who is the administrator of the Doge Service, and who is the administrator of the U.S. Doge Temporary Service, and who do they report to?
The U.S. Doge Service was the former USDS, U.S. Digital Service, that was housed within OMB. Along with that EO, it was moved out of OMB into the Executive Office of the President as a standalone office reporting to the Chief of Staff. It's been led by Steve Davis, and we're in the midst of with the last week or so of establishing the leadership on an ongoing basis. But I think the vision for Doge is, in addition to having some of the consulting work that they've done continue in the EOP, and that's one of the reasons we have a request in as part of the ITOR account, is that Doge would go and be far more institutionalized at the actual agency. So many Doge employees and FTEs are at the agencies working almost as in-house consultants as a part of the agency's leadership. And I think, you know, the leadership of Doge is now much more decentralized. It's the agency heads, and it has been for some time. The president has always said from day one, agency heads are in charge of their departments. And they were benefiting from the consulting that Doge was doing along the lines, and now that is much more pronounced.
I appreciate that there are many jurisdictions involved in Doge's work, but OMB is front and center here, including in the subsequent Doge EOs responsible for reorganizing the federal workforce, including hiring practices, EO 14170, federal hiring, and EO 14210, the federal workforce. And so I realize that I'm about to run out of time, so you might talk about that on the second round. Chair now recognizes the ranking member Hoyer for any questions he may have.
Mr. Director, OMB submits a requested budget. Congress passes the budget. Do you consider the budget that Congress passes to be a suggestion or a directive?
We believe it's a proposal for Congress to consider. We propose, and you obviously take it as a policy proposal and send it through your appropriations process.
Question, Director. Once we pass that back to you, do you take it as a suggestion or a directive?
It's a directive. We believe it's important for the congressional appropriations process to give us the levels as consistent with the power of the purse to set levels by which we can't go above.
And therefore, you consider it a ceiling.
We do believe it is a ceiling.
So we send you a budget and say, spend $100 on X objective. You can spend anywhere between $1 and $99 or $100. Is that accurate from your perspective?
No, I don't think it's accurate from my perspective. I think that it's much more similar to if you've asked us to perform a function and you've given us $100 million, and if we can perform it for $80 million, there is given the system as to whether we are required constitutionally, we don't believe that we are, to push every last dollar out the door and lead to use it or lose it situations where we are creating waste, fraud, and abuse at the agencies at the
And
end
the
of the
Congress
fiscal
made
year.
provision for that. It's called a rescission. Is that accurate?
There is one tool that Congress, as one of many tools that Congress has given to deal with that scenario.
The other tool is the unilateral judgment of the President of the United States and/or yourself not to spend.
No, I was actually referring under the ICA to normal rescissions, deferrals, pocket rescissions. There's all manner of provisions in the ICA, in addition to just the agency doing the work that it does programmatically to review whether the spending that Congress has appropriated to an agency within the consistent with the law, authorizing committees is there and can be done consistent with the president's views as he was elected on behalf of the American people.
Thank you. Do you believe you have traumatized the people at OMB?
No, I don't.
So, notwithstanding that, did they also get the letter sent to 2+ million people?
They did.
Was a judgment made as to how many of the people at OMB were absolutely necessary to do the job you now want to expand?
No, and in fact,
No judgment was made on that.
so as it pertains to the letter that you're referring to, it went out. I believe it went out before I was in office as the director, and I don't think we lost very few at all. And my hope was that we wouldn't lose anyone from the deferred.
But you lost a substantial amount throughout the government service without any understanding of how critical their work was to the task at hand. Is that accurate?
Well, again, it was based on their choice.
Is that accurate?
I don't think it actually is accurate because the decision was made to give the employees the chance to make that determination. I don't think it was done lightly, and I think those employees thought long and hard about whether it made
I
sense.
agree, it wasn't done lightly. Obviously, it was considered blitzkrieg on the entire federal government. But nobody knew whether or not critically important people were going to take that or not. Isn't that accurate?
Well, I think it's important to reflect that we don't ask employees to be in these positions and locked into these positions. There is no reason that they would have had to take those, that opportunity, and it's something that was not in any way compelled upon them.
Of course, it wasn't compelled, but nor did you have, or Mr. Musk have, or his people, any knowledge of who would take it and who didn't, and therefore, it was simply across the board, which could have cost, let's say everybody said yes. Now, probably everybody wouldn't have said yes, but that would have been a cataclysmic event for the United States. Do you believe this is the way people should be treated?
I think all employees, political and career, should be treated with respect and dignity, and to have that reflected through all of our employment processes.
People just heard. Order. The people who just laughed obviously don't share that view. They're all people who were removed involuntarily, one way or another. They were traumatized. So you accomplished your objective, which I think personally is not an objective that either any personnel manager should be very proud of. How many people on the administrative leave are being paid not to work?
Congressman, I just would push back on your characterization. It's never been my desire to traumatize individuals or workers at federal agencies.
Why did you say that?
Because you didn't actually listen to the entirety of the context of what I said. I was referring specifically to bureaucracies that are weaponized against the American people. So do I believe that at the NIH or the OMB or VA, that across the federal government know that there aren't career individuals that are doing incredible work and are great public servants, but the notion that we don't have weaponized bureaucracies, and we saw this in the last administration, that are aimed at parts of our own citizenry.
Let me
The
stop
chair
you.
now recognizes Mr. Womack for any questions he may have.
Would my friend yield for 30 seconds?
I think the gentleman, we'll have another round. You can pick up on that line of questioning then, because we all have questions to ask. And I'm going to start with this one. Director Vought, good to see you again. We worked on many occasions together. This is an appropriations hearing, and appropriations is driven by what we call top-line numbers, 302As and then 302Bs that flow down to the various subcommittees. But it begins with a budget. Where's the budget?
Well, it's great to see you again. We believe you have the budget.
We have a skinny budget.
You have the skinny budget, the discretionary budget in full, allows you to get the appropriations process moving forward. Our approach with regard to the rest of what you would see in a full year comprehensive budget is that we've been focused on reconciliation. And so every aspect of what we've been trying to do has been to further that bill, to get it to the president's desk, and then we will come along afterwards with any supplementary information, proposals, deficit pictures. But we thought it would, at the end of the day, confuse the Congress and confuse the American people to have two sets of proposals, two sets of numbers, and that's one of the reasons that we are focusing on reconciliation. Understand the job that you've had to do, and we wanted to get you material as soon as we possibly could. Worked with Chairman Cole as early and often as I could, have not actually not come and talked with the Cardinals at every opportunity. We very much want to work with this committee.
So I think we all have a shared goal of putting the fiscal house of this nation in order. I certainly do, and I've been working toward that, albeit unsuccessfully, since I chaired the Joint Select Committee on Budget Process Reform, and we can come back to that if I have time. But the total outlays of the federal government in general, for those that are watching this hearing, that are going to read excerpts from this hearing, what are the total outlays of this nation? From
$7 trillion around?
Around $7 trillion, and we're going to receive income in various forms to the amount of about what?
$5 trillion.
About $5 trillion. A little less than 7, a little less than 5, maybe thereabouts when we look at the 25 numbers. But the last set of numbers we have is, I think, in 2024. Of that $7 trillion in outlays, how much of that is actually under the purview of this committee?
About a third.
About a third. So we're looking at about a 30 to 33, 34, 35% slice of that federal. But the rest of it is what we call mandatory spending. Is that right?
Correct.
And how is mandatory spending broken down?
Mandatory spending is broken down on all of the programs that are set in law. And so, you know, they are not, with very few exceptions that go through your committee, like food stamps or Medicaid, that are considered appropriated entitlements. The authorizers set the law, and the people who are benefiting from those laws can come to the federal agencies and receive their benefits.
So only Congress can really change that through its lawmaking process.
Correct.
Is that correct? And of that roughly $5 trillion of mandatory spending, thereabouts, how much of that is the net interest on the debt?
Net interest on the debt is about $1 trillion now. It's exceeded defense. When we left office, unfortunately, it was only $300 billion, still far too high. But in the last 4 years, we've gone from about $350 billion in annual net interest, and now we're upwards of $1 trillion.
And it's because we have a debt of about $37-ish trillion, right? What would like a 50 basis point move in the interest rate, and I would suspect that's very prospectful, given the fact that we were just downgraded by the third rating agency. What would that do to the net interest on a $37 trillion debt if we moved like 50 basis points?
We're probably talking about $1 trillion swing there.
When are we going to deal with mandatory spending? And I'm not talking about cuts, I'm talking about sustainability, because we've all said, and we've pretty much all agreed that we want to make sure that we honor the promises that we've made to older Americans and vulnerable Americans. But right now, the effort is only on the discretionary budget of the U.S. government. It's about 33% of total spending. So at what point in time will we see a plan and a strategy for which we really go after and fix the largest share of the federal spending that is the crux of the national deficit that we have today?
You know, we believe that we're doing that with this bill that you have passed out of the House. And one of the reasons we're so excited about it is that for the first time since 1990s, we are talking about trillions of dollars with regard to mandatory savers. $1.7 trillion now is an enormous opportunity and first step along the lines of what you're talking about and what we've proposed in budgets before. So I think it's, you know, for those that are saying, where are the Doge cuts? That's not a reconciliation thing. For those that are saying, where are the mandatory reforms? That is in that bill, and we believe it's the first major conversation like this we've had since the 1990s. We will have more proposals as we go forward. You know, the president wants to have a balanced budget. 3 out of our 4 budgets in the first term were aimed at budget, had that as a goal, and we had large mandatory savers in those budgets that were consistent with the president's promises to protect Social Security and Medicare, and we will continue to have reforms along those lines.
Thank you very much. I yield.
The chair now recognizes Ms. DeLauro, ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, we really do not have a budget. What you sent covers this year. There's not no 10-year budget. There really isn't any vision for the future at all of what you've sent up. Director Vought, after an appropriation is enacted, the first thing that happens is before an agency can deliver the promises to the American people is OMB has to make funding available through a legally binding decision known as an apportionment. In essence, you are the first and sometimes biggest bureaucratic hurdle that stands between American taxpayers and the services, support, and protections they have promised in spending laws. And for over 100 years, apportionments were secret. Reiterate, these decisions were effectively laws that you and your also unelected predecessors made whenever you liked without accountability or transparency. I fought on a bipartisan basis, bicameral basis, alongside members of this subcommittee for 4 years to change that. We enacted simple transparency requirements because this committee and the Congress need information to effectively legislate. Independent watchdog organizations deserve the information to help the American public understand how your decisions affect their lives. 3, most importantly, the American taxpayers are entitled to see how you, your predecessors, and every OMB director, how you are spending their money. My question is, you do not think, Director Vought, that Congress deserves to know how you carry out the laws that we enact. You do not believe that American taxpayers deserve to see how you spend their money, do you?
No, I don't think that characterization is true. We do. It's one of the reasons why we come up to the Hill and testify, and we explain our decisions. We believe that apportionments are legally binding, but not final agency actions, and that it is part of a pre-decisional deliberative process on behalf of the executive branch to be able to manage agencies and the programs therein. And what we found in the last 4 years in which the law that you worked hard to put into place that we have constitutional concerns about is that it actually degraded the oversight responsibilities that OMB had, in that we would the people would actually change.
Excuse me, Mr. Director, because my time is running out. You know, in all fairness, I had this debate and discussion. I'm not just having it with you. I had a debate and discussion on this with your predecessor and others with the same argument and so forth. The American people, the Congress who legislate and enacts the laws, has to have the ability to understand what you're spending, how you're doing it, at what intervals, and so forth. And also, let me just say, this requirement, as I say, was debated for 4 years, including with you specifically during your prior tenure as OMB director. Your predecessor did comply with the law for over 2 years, and you followed this law for 2 months. What happened? Why did the website come down? Why do we not know what is happening? Why are we going back to those days of secret decisions being made by you and whomever else in terms of the spending of the dollars that we constitutionally enact here when we put these bills into law with congressionally directed resources that serve the American people? Tell me what happened. Why did you change what you were doing for 2 months or what your predecessor was doing over the last couple of years?
Well, we had constitutional concerns with the provision. We had a veto threat against this provision in the first term. If it was presented while the president was still in office, I expect you would have had a signing statement that said, not unlike our letter to the committee, not unlike the DOJ's letter to the committee, we have constitutional concerns with it. And it's something that degraded our ability to manage taxpayer resources and do the very
We passed a law, and with all due respect, again, I think the level of your honesty on your claims really shines through on this topic, and there probably isn't much more point in discussing it, but that goes at the very fact you make up constitutional issues, where the Constitution places that power of the purse within this body and within an Appropriations Committee. Historically, it is there. But you make a decision as to what you want to do, what you think is Constitution or not Constitution without any basis in fact, thereby pulling down that website that allows us to see what you are doing. We have no way of knowing if you are carrying out what we have lawfully required the executive branch to do. That is our responsibility, and your responsibility is to carry out what it is that we have appropriated here. You just can't pick and choose whatever the hell you want in going forward, if it says, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair now recognizes Mrs. Hinson for her 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member for holding this hearing today. Director Vought, thank you so much for coming to answer our questions. It says a lot that you're here talking about the efficiencies that you're finding and the improvements you're making at OMB. This is really about taxpayer money and protecting the integrity of where those dollars go. And as you probably know, I've been very, very passionate about improper payments through OMB. We know from the numbers out of GAO, that number is somewhere between 230 and 500 some billion dollars. I actually think it's probably higher than that, right? And when we look at the taxpayer money being disrespected in that way and people for years turning a blind eye to that in terms of fixing this problem. So I appreciate your candor and the effort by this administration to do that through the executive order from the president 14249 to protect America's bank account against waste, fraud, and abuse. And I was proud to support this by introducing legislation here to codify the president's executive order to do exactly that, protecting American taxpayers from wasteful spending. One of the provisions of the order did direct OMB to work with Department of Treasury to establish pre-certification and pre-award procedures across the federal government. This is the breakdown in process that has led to this fraud and improper payments. Can you explain why those procedures were not in place before this executive order?
One of the things in this issue in general, and I'm sure you've been frustrated by it, is the extent to which this is all common sense, and yet it never seems to happen. And I actually posed the question to our team this morning, why did we see nothing before the Trump administration? And honestly, there just wasn't, it wasn't an interest in the previous administration. We're very thankful for the executive order. We're going to be taking our duties very, very seriously. We look forward to working with you on this. I think much of what Doge has identified is the extent to which the agencies have not been pinging the systems and the data sets that are there and can be there, and then we need to fight through whatever bureaucracies make an institutional argument for why whatever the grant agency is shouldn't be cross-checking it with the data that's available. So it'll be a priority of ours, and we look forward to working with you on it.
Yeah, it certainly is a common sense thing to know where the money's going and what one hand knowing what the other hand is doing in that process. It's absolutely critical. Can you update us on the implementation? You mentioned, obviously, you and I share that frustration that it wasn't in place before, and we do look forward to working with you, get you whatever resources you need to be able to implement this. Where do you stand in making some of these fundamental changes to protect
We are
taxpayers?
working on government-wide guidance to agencies to implement the EO right now. We're going through a policy process internally as to what that should include, and we'll be back to you soon with details on that.
Okay, looking forward to updates there. And as we work to pass all 12 of these appropriations bills, hopefully before that September 30th deadline, can you ensure us that the days of not tracking where that money is going is over? You have a good eye and a good watch on it for taxpayers?
Yes, and we've got a number of statutory responsibilities also in terms of taxpayer right to know, statutes that have been tasked to OMB. It's another response to the chairman in terms of the need for the FTEs, is that often people want stuff to happen at OMB because they know it can get done, that we have tools to get the agencies to move forward. But therein is our need for the employees to be able to do that important work and to push through and make sure that we're living up to what you all have asked us to do.
Yeah. Well, this certainly should be a bipartisan issue, and I questioned your predecessor about this and former Secretary of the Treasury as well. And Secretary Bessent was in here just a few weeks ago saying the same thing. He was incredulous that this was allowed to happen and go on. It should be a bipartisan issue. At least it was, I think, before President Trump started getting the credit for this. So we should be able to get behind policy that helps to fix this problem. What else are you doing at OMB to help prevent improper payments, hold agencies accountable for their spending? What does that process look like other than just issuing that guidance to other agencies? But where does the accountability come in there?
So one of the cultural aspects of what I've tried to emphasize at OMB is one OMB. And so I don't like the notion of you have a budget side of the house, a regulatory side of the house, and a management side of the house, because often everything gets stovepiped and you don't have the main interactors with the agencies that are benefiting from much of the work that you would find at the management side doing improper payments. So one of the things that we are doing, we had a meeting along these lines just yesterday about making sure that the people that work with the budget offices, the ones that are working regulatorily, are coming up with policies that actually help along these lines. So it's not just, hey, did you go through the right process and ping the right systems? We want there to actually people be getting credit for doing deregulatory activities that are also dealing with improper payments. We want there to be an emphasis on programmatically being rewarded for having the various budget offices and teams at the agencies being rewarded for this kind of activity. And I think That's the benefit of doing it at OMB, and I think that's what will inevitably be the success from it.
Yeah, you have a wealth of knowledge. You should use it to your advantage going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pocan for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Vought, for being here. I think you said the president supports the big bill that was passed out of the House, correct? I think you also said the president does not support cutting Medicare.
Correct.
Okay, so in the bill, there's a $500 billion cut that gets triggered to Medicare. So I know a number of the people who voted for the bill are starting to read it now and finding there's parts they don't like. You might want to take a look at that provision.
As you know,
That's okay. That's okay. I only have
you don't want the
5 minutes.
explanation?
I didn't ask you the question, did I? I'm asking you a question though. Since we didn't have your remarks this morning, I think we got them this afternoon. You mentioned cultural Marxism. You did it in your comment. Could you please, in 2 or 3 sentences, define cultural Marxism?
Sure, it's a political theory that instead of dividing people on the basis of economic haves or have-nots, that you're dividing people on the basis of race and identity. And it's an attempt that we've seen, unfortunately, in this country, culminating in CRT of dividing people on the race and in our agencies and identity.
So your definition, Mr. Director, is different than the definition I'm pulling up. First thing that pops up on here, it says cultural Marxism refers to a far-right anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that misrepresents Western Marxism as being responsible for modern progressive movements, identity politics, and political correctness. That's first definition that pops up here. It actually comes up a couple times on the first page.
On Google?
Yeah, you identify yourself as a Christian nationalist, correct?
Look, I'm a Christian. I don't think my faith should be a subject for this.
No, I just asked you a simple question. Do you identify as a Christian nationalist?
No, this is a Christian.
good enough.
My faith is about is one of an evangelical Christian faith.
That's okay. Not here to debate that. I saw
But you brought
somewhere
it up.
Christian nationalist. No, I asked you if you were a Christian nationalist. You said you weren't, correct?
These are debates in the think tank world that we have
Okay,
about
that's
what
all
it
right.
means
Stop,
to be a
please,
Christian nation.
Mr.
It's not about what
Mr.
I've been,
Director, that's
I've
not the
been
question
asked.
I asked.
I've not
Okay,
been
so
asked to talk about that.
you support the efforts of Doge. You mentioned Steve Davis, and I know we talked about trying to bring the director of Doge in here, and that would be very helpful. Problem is, I just read he's also leaving with Elon Musk. So who's in charge of Doge? If the guy who is taking over after Elon Musk, who just left, and he's leaving, it sounds like this is a bit of a circus. Who's in charge of Doge?
The cabinet agencies that are in charge of the Doge consultants that work for them are fundamentally in control of Doge.
Oh, that's an answer only a mother could love. All right. So you support the efforts of Doge, I understand. Is the federal government currently spending less this year than it did last year?
No, it's not.
Great. And part of that is because you've sent us a rescission package worth $9 billion that goes after Big Bird and Cookie Monster, but you've added $200 billion to defense and homeland security. You've also, the bill that you just said the White House supports is going to add, depending who you talk to, $2.4 trillion to $5 trillion to the national debt. It's going to make somewhere between 11 and 16 million people lose their health care. I know you said on a Sunday morning show no one will lose coverage as a result of this bill. Is that still your standing?
Which one of those would you like me to take?
The one I just asked. I'll ask it again. I'm sorry if I
The
wasn't
bill does
clear.
not lead to less coverage for Medicaid beneficiaries. It has improper payments,
so-
and it leads to the fact that people who are ineligible because they're illegal aliens or because
Illegal
they're
aliens
unwilling
do
to
not
work.
get federal dollars from Medicaid, correct?
That's not true. They get them in many different states, including California.
Federal dollars?
Federal dollars
They
using
get state
provider.
dollars. State can provide it. Are there any federal dollars?
Congressman,
how many
because
federal
of-
dollars then, since
Congressman,
you're
be-
the expert, how many federal
Congressman,
dollars go
because
to
of-
funding illegal aliens getting Medicaid?
Congressman, because of the money
It's a question,
laundering.
it's a number. It's a question, it's a number. How many dollars go to illegal aliens, federal dollars, for Medicaid? It's a simple
Congressman,
question.
It is not actually a simple question because
All
Congress.
your secretaries have a hard time with simple questions lately. I got to tell you, it is a
don't
simple.
pose simple
But you were saying that that's true, so we will. If you can get back to us with that amount, how's that sound? How much federal dollars? are
I'm
going
happy to get back to you about how the bill works and getting rid of the money laundering
So
schemes
a
that
lot of
state
people
use.
disagree with you. The CBO disagrees with your analysis. Yale and Penn said 13.7 million people will lose health insurance. You also said this won't increase the debt. Is that correct? The
It
bill
will
won't
not increase the debt. It will lead to
So
reduced
there,
deficits.
the
and
Cato
debt.
Institute disagrees with you. Moody's disagrees. The CBO disagrees. Senator Hawley and Senator Rand and Senator Collins disagree. Elon Musk disagrees. Virtually everyone on this side of the aisle. So you're saying everyone is wrong, but you are the right one, that this does not increase the debt?
I'm saying that all the watchdogs, including the Congressional Budget Office, use a skewed vision of a view of what the baseline is.
They were less
base-
than a few percent wrong last time on your tax bill when they predicted it almost dead on. So you're saying this time there's significant changes and they don't know what's going on and only you do, is that correct?
I'm suggesting, I'm stating that they use a
You
baseline.
disagree at the Cato Institute
Yes,
and Moody's
yes.
and Senator Hawley?
Senator Hawley has a view as to the Medicaid programs that we are working with to articulate why we believe that these reforms do not hurt the beneficiaries that are involved.
I'm over
Chair
time, but
now
I'll appreciate
recognizes
it next
Mr.
round.
Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vogt, thanks so much for being here, and I apologize for the badgering that you're getting. I would really have appreciated the opportunity to hear your thorough and complete answers, but we'll deal with that another time. I just have to editorialize a bit, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I believe the reason that we hear the arguments from the other side is that you're doing exactly what the American people have demanded. The American people are fed up with seeing their tax dollars wasted up here in Washington, D.C. You're getting down to the core of that waste, fraud, and abuse. And they're angry about it. I can't believe how much time that they're spending to protect their right to waste American taxpayer dollars. I appreciate your courage to jump right into the middle of it, to defend your position, and to do what all of us were sent to do here in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.
What I see taking place is exactly what should take place. We have an administration now that's willing to really dig in and find out where the spending is going inside of federal agencies, making immediate changes. Change is uncomfortable often for people. I recognize that. But change is necessary right now. We all agree that we can't stay on the current spending trend. Let's also recognize that you're living up to your constitutional oath. You're making recommendations based off of things you see inside the administration that we can't see, that have been hidden from us for the last several years. And I interpret that you're going to be coming back to Congress saying, you made these decisions. We don't think that you need all this spending now. And then we're going to make a decision whether or not we should continue that. I don't see a constitutional issue. I think we're doing exactly what the American people ask us to do. So that said, for years, the Congressional Budget Office has been touted as a nonpartisan agency, but there's a growing body of evidence showing that it regularly overestimates the benefits of Democratic policies while underestimating their costs. And it downplays the success of Republican initiatives, such as President Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, while overestimating the cost. Coupled with the publicity, known Democratic political affiliations among key CBO staff, this raises some serious questions about the agency's ability to impartially evaluate the cost of legislation. My first question is, how can OMB and Congress work together to ensure future budget and policy decisions are based on sound, objective data rather than politically motivated projections?
Thank you, Congressman. I think one of them is working together to properly frame the information that CBO has put out. I mean, I would not presume to give any advice as to how you all might govern CBO, but I would just say, as to educating the public, we try to do that this afternoon very quickly about how they construct their baselines leads to a warped view on a bipartisan basis for the policies that you all are considering as a major problem. And I both on the revenue side and on the tax side, there's often a lack of willingness to look at what might happen dynamically, not just on revenues, but even the fact that someone that is not eligible for a program will be able to get additional care because they go to their private health insurance. I mean, that is the kind of analysis that CBO just does not do. And as a result, you get bad outcomes when you are having a public policy debate about it.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. Do you believe that the CBO's estimate of President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill accurately represents the benefits that it will provide to the American people and the fiscal course correction that it will provide our nation.
No, I think it's fundamentally wrong. I stated that today. It will lead to reduced deficits and debt of $1.4 trillion. It will reduce mandatory savings of $1.7 trillion. And I don't think the way they construct their baseline, not only does it give a fair shake to economic growth, but it fundamentally misreads the economic consequences of not extending current law tax relief. I mean, the degree to which we would have a recession or worse if the tax relief is not extended is something that they just fundamentally do not factor into their analysis.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Chair, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Rivers. The chair now recognizes Mrs. Glusenkamp Perez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Director Vought, for being here. I used to run, my husband and I own an auto repair and machine shop. I will never forget having an OSHA inspector come to my shop and ask me if my AC machine was a welder. The divorce of theory from practice, respect for people who have done the work, and who has the authority and the knowledge. My question to you is, like, how are you adapting your staffing decisions to ensure that it is not just a sterling resume who is in your office, but people who have done the work, respect for the trades? How many people do you have in your office who don't have a college degree?
I don't know the answer to that question. I come from a family of electricians, so that is my background. I've been very enthusiastic and excited about the policy proposals we had in the first term that I'm sure are working themselves through this one as well to ensure that we're not expecting people to have college degrees and sterling resumes that might show itself. But if someone can do the job, we want them at OMB as it pertains to our agency.
One kind of theoretical question I have here is that, I think Wendell Berry said that excellent workmanship, as with a breaking plow, is destructive. Efficiency itself, it's not useful. It is efficiency towards what? It's about effectiveness. It's about a question of, like, what are we trying to do here? What is the purpose of this bill? My question to you is, like, all of this claims of pursuing efficiency, but the question is effectiveness. Like, that is the true goal of how are you implementing what my community needs in these systems. And a lot of that, in my view, comes down to the question of procedural burden on civil servants. So if you're successful in your pursuits, we will soon have a much smaller field of civil servants. Who is going to reduce the procedural burden on those civil servants to pursue effectiveness?
Well, I think, government efficiency is not meant to sum the totality of what you want from a federal government. I think it's meant to articulate an imbalance that we've seen in recent years and to correct for that imbalance. And so that's the partnership with whatever department or agency you're dealing with. Is they have been given responsibilities by Congress to go and perform functions on behalf of the American people. And the Department of Government Efficiency, and to OMB to a large extent historically, is designed to make sure the work that they do is done in the best way possible. But I'm honestly, Congresswoman, I'm one of these people that encourages OMB not to ask the efficiency question first and foremost, but to ask, both in serving the president or the laws that you all have given us, what is trying to be accomplished by this, and let's make sure we accomplish it, and then you've earned the right to figure out how to do it most efficiently.
Yeah, my concern is that right now it's a process of randomly scapegoating civil servants and not a pursuit of, many of those people are exactly the people who could tell you what kind of bullshit paperwork they're putting up with. And so how to have not just a managerial class tell you what is appropriate, but actually the people who are doing the work should be part of that process of pointing out what the unproductive, proceduralism is.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I want to know what career staff thinks. It's a hallmark of my time at OMB. And I hate the paperwork that we often put on agencies to perform and do things that are not designed to actually lead to better outcomes. And so we have a deregulatory side for the agencies doing the work as it comes to GIPRA and other things on the management side.
So I know you're a Christian. You might know the verse in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 8 that says, "Woe to those who add farm to farm and house to house till they are the sole inhabitants of the land." This is, I think, I hope a sentiment that we share, but the presidential budget calls for a 10% reduction in the Federal Trade Commission's competition budget and a static budget for the Department of Justice Antitrust Division and reduction in the size of the workforce. So how will reducing the budget and staff of the antitrust agencies bring down the cost of living and ensure that small businesses like mine can compete on a fair, level playing field without a regulatory mode or antitrust forces holding us down?
Look, we think it's a priority. We have given the Department of Justice and the FTC the resources that they've asked for, and we don't necessarily value everything by the dollar amount that is given, but we do think it's important, and it's something that our leadership there will continue to pursue.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Alford for his 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Joyce and Ranking Member Hoyer, and Mr. Laro, thank you for being here today. Director Vought, thank you most of all. I appreciate the work you're doing to try to right the ship in America, and we're about to hit a reef if we don't do something with our spending. I do want to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Womack's questioning about the full budget. So you were saying we are not going to receive the full budget until after the reconciliation package is done, which at the earliest would be July 4th. Is that correct?
Correct. We will be forthcoming with additional information to fill out the deficit picture and all of the additional information at that time.
Well, I'm new to this. I'm new on appropriations. I'm just kind of learning this process, but this really puts us up against the wall. I mean, we're having our Milcon VA markup tomorrow without a full budget. We've got to get all 12 of these out of committee, and we've got to get these passed on the House floor. We've got to get a lot done before our August in-district work period. We don't need another CR, and we don't need a government shutdown. That will not be good for the president. It will not be good for Congress. It will not be good for America. So
Let me clarify, Congressman.
Yes.
You have everything you need for all of your markups. You do not just have high-level discretionary proposals that we were forthcoming with nearly a month ago. You have the full budget as it pertains to the appropriations process, and you have all of the information that is needed to be able to write those bills, and particularly in the VA context where you're dealing with advanced appropriations.
Right.
You have that material. Congressional budget justifications and the appendix went up last week and are continuing to flow. Where there's only some work that remains is on the defense side, and we are pushing DOD as fast as we can to get their remaining information up to the Hill.
Thank you for your support of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Of course, we too appreciate that. You've said that, talking to critics, they've been relying on faulty CBO numbers for their criticism of the bill. Example, in 2017, the CBO was off with its projections of the TCJA by $1 trillion. What are the flaws in CBO scoring?
Well, other than the baselines that they use, which don't reflect or aren't comparable with how they treat spending. So CBO assumes that spending will continue. All of your appropriations bills are assumed, not on an annual basis, which of course they are passed on, but they are assumed to continue with inflation over the life of the 10-year window. That's not the case with tax revenue. For the way that the law was written and the way that CBO operates is that they judge an expiration date to be something that causes it to look like a new cost to taxpayers. That's one, and then of course they've had just historically undynamic assumptions with regard to tax policy and other policy moves therein.
I want to talk a little bit about the rescission package that you sent over, $9.4 billion package. Secretary Rubio was sitting in that seat 2 weeks ago before NSRP subcommittee. There have been 5,341 USDA awards that have been terminated, unobligated savings of $27.7 billion, yet your rescission package only includes $9.3 billion, I believe, for state and foreign aid. Is that correct?
It's correct, yeah.
Are we going to see further rescission packages that will claw back this money?
Perhaps. We are very anxious to see the reception from a vote standpoint in the House and the Senate. We've had tremendous interactions with your committee. sitting down with the chairman, the subcommittee chairman, to make sure that the package, one of the reasons why it took a little bit, it was constructed a long time ago, was we were having the conversations with this committee to make it so that it can be passed next week.
Okay.
If that goes well, I'm less concerned about the House as I am in the Senate, and it's very important for it to pass. If it does, it'll be worth the effort, and we'll send up additional packages.
Last question. Part of the rescission package, the Global Health Program for $400 million, it says this proposal would eliminate only those programs that neither provide life-saving treatment nor support American interests. Does this include PEPFAR, any money that's funding PEPFAR whatsoever?
It does. It has a cut to PEPFAR, but not to life-saving treatment. Let me just walk you
What
through
about
some of
prevention, sir?
So the challenge we have in PEPFAR is that PEPFAR has been perceived as only life-saving treatment. But if you look, you've got $2.5 million for teaching young children how to make environmentally friendly reproductive health decisions. You have nearly $1 million for services for transgender people, sex workers, and their client and sexual networks in Nepal. You have $5.1 million to strengthen the resilience of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer global movements. So even in an area like PEPFAR, and I did see some of the reaction from the Senate as to us including PEPFAR, we believe that it needs to be on the table. We can find waste, fraud, and abuse there that the American people would not support, and it's one of the reasons why it's in the package, but it will not lead to life-saving treatment being denied. That has been a hallmark of all of President Trump's budgetary policies with regard to PEPFAR, is if you are receiving care, you will continue to receive that care.
I'm out of time. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ivy for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I was shocked when I heard you say that all government employees should be treated with respect, because that is absolutely not what I saw on the ground level. I mean, I saw people crying when they were coming out of USDA. I think they'd been given 15-minute intervals to retrieve their belongings. I talked to people who were probationary employees who'd been given these mass emails that they're going to be terminated. They'd quit jobs and moved from other places, sold their houses to come do this work, in reasonable reliance on often for the government to work for the federal government and desire to serve their country. And they were unceremoniously pushed out the door. And when you said, I know you want to know what career staff thinks, that was a shocker to me too, because many of these people, when they were being forced out, were trying to call and find out what their status was, whether they were going to be able to come back to work or not, when they would be terminated, all of those things. And that still goes on. And they don't get the answers from you all. So, I appreciate your view of what's going on, but you got to know that it's entirely different from the standpoint of the people who are going through this. And I just want to focus on 3 quick areas where there's a potential impact. I mean, one thing you said that was interesting to me, you're going to ask for additional 20 positions, if I heard you correct,
Yes, sir.
at OMB. It's a little ironic because you're slashing positions across the government and funding. But we had the FBI director testify here a few weeks ago, and he came in and said he has 1,100 vacancies, I think it is, and he needs 1,300 additional. I think we can all agree that the importance of public safety, and someone just mentioned fraud, nobody ferrets it out better than the FBI. Yet, the day after he testified here, he testified in the Senate and said, I don't need those positions after all. And then just one quick point on the fraud piece. I saw an FBI agent who runs the fraud division testify that between $500 and $700 million every year is stolen from the United States by our overseas adversaries, and that they needed additional resources to track that down. But apparently you guys aren't going to give that to them. With respect to national security, and the science piece of this too, the trauma quote's been read to you, and I heard your comment, it's taken out of context, and I listened to that speech. I don't agree. I think it was consistent with what you were saying that day, but let's just assume for the moment that what you're saying there is really true. The bottom line is that the actions that you've taken since then reiterates the message that you're trying to traumatize these people and that you want to treat them like villains. And so what we've got going on right now on the science and tech piece that's rippling through NASA and other agencies where it's critical for us to have these science and tech folks, AI, the competition for quantum computing and the like, they think they're being forced out of these positions, they're starting to look to go to Europe. They're starting to look to go back to Korea or India or other places rather than staying here and doing the work. And I know from businesses in my district that they need people from overseas because we're not producing enough of them over here in the United States. Yet we're narrowing the pipeline based on what you're doing with respect to cutting grants to help fund. We're narrowing the pipeline with respect to the impact you're having on the universities in science and tech. We're narrowing the pipeline with respect to the postdocs and other people doing the research and the government contractors who are doing much of this work too. So over and over again, we're squeezing that line down. If you look at the contrast with China, they're doing exactly the opposite. And they're doing exactly the opposite in the areas where we're in the most competitive areas and where we really need to win. We don't want China to get ahead of us militarily. We don't want China to get ahead of us on quantum computing and AI. But we're making cuts to NIST, we're making cuts to NASA, we're making cuts to the NIH, we're making cuts across the board on some of the most important aspects of what we need to do in the United States to maintain that lead. And with respect to public health, I see my time's running out here, and I guess we can do a second round in a minute, but same kind of thing. The cuts to NIH, my father died from Alzheimer's, I'm a cancer survivor. You guys shut down clinical trials in the middle of those going forward. And it's not like we can just flip a switch and it comes back and starts over again. Some of those are going to take years to catch back up to where they were. And some of the people who were conducting the research are leaving the United States because they don't want to have that happen again. So look, I appreciate the goal of going after waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't think that that's what you all have really focused on here, your impact certainly, because we can go through that in the second round, but you're really undermining our ability to compete and stay ahead of China on really critical areas like national security and public safety.
Chair now recognizes the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Lolota from New York.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, good to be with you today. You're the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, is that correct?
Correct.
And you've previously served in that capacity in 2020 and 2021?
In 2019 and 2020,
Went through January 2021?
I did.
Okay. And you're the executive branch's Chief Financial Planner and Policy Coordinator. Is that a fair description of your title?
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Along with the Secretary of Treasury.
Great. And in that role, how important is America's debt and deficit to you?
Huge. I mean, we have an enormous problem ahead of us with regard to the debt that we're facing as a country. It's hanging over us. It's causing massive interest costs each and every year to keep growing, and the impact that it can suddenly cause much worse situation than we've seen thus far is still always out there as a possibility. It's one of the reasons we have to pass this bill to be able to begin to get a handle on the spending that has been on autopilot that
We're gonna get into that, sir.
members have been calling attention
About
to.
37 trillion, is that about right?
Yes.
And the deficit is about what?
$2 trillion and somewhere between 1.5 and $2 trillion.
And the debt to GDP ratio, pretty bad, right?
Yep,
Worse since World War II?
yep.
And what if we do nothing? What if Congress sits on its hands, the executive branch does nothing? What if we just do the status quo? What happens with respect to interest rates, opportunity, buying power, the dollar, opportunity for future generations? What happens to all that if we do nothing?
It will all get worse, and we will continue to have issues with credit agencies. And one of the reasons why Moody's was late to the party, but the original credit ratings were drawing attention to the futility that this town had with the inability to ever pass anything of substance. And I think that has what has changed with the bill that you all are considering right now through Congress.
And I agree with you. Reconciliation is a start of something that we have to do to put our country on a better track, to give more opportunity to the future generations. I want to switch gears just a little bit, but get back to that point in a moment. In your experience, scores, predictions by the CBO, JCT, how have they been, sir?
Not accurate.
Thinking back to the first Trump administration and President Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, how would you rate the estimates by the CBO and JCT?
They did not do a good job of rating it accurately, and you know they didn't think we'd ever get to 3% growth. We did. They were off in their revenue assumptions. But ultimately, that's par for the course. I mean, they don't think through dynamic assumptions with regard to their revenue policies.
And about how much in revenue were they off by? Do you remember?
I don't have it at my fingertips. I think
1.5 trillion?
That's about right.
Only 1.5 trillion. Are you familiar with CBO's work when they scored the American Rescue Plan?
I am, but happy to be informed more on it.
Accurate or not accurate?
If you've got a question there, I'm happy to answer it, but off the
Sure.
top of my head.
I'll lead you a little bit with this question. They projected inflation to be around 3.3% in 2021 and 2.5 in 2022 and 2.3 in 2024. Take a guess. Was it higher or lower than the projections, the inflation?
I'm sure that it served the administration's policy objectives.
Yeah, 4.78% and 4.1% respectively, way off, but yes, favorable to that administration. And now, fast forward, we have this one big, beautiful bill before us that the House Republicans we passed last week, and we've received some new scores over the last day or so. And are you familiar with the CBO score on the growth rate they project in the one big, beautiful bill?
It's about 2%.
Yeah, 1.8. Do you believe that it is an accurate enough growth rate given some of the historical context between TCJA1? Much of the same policies in TCJA1 led to 2, 3, and 4% growth, and yet they're scoring in this 1.8.
No, I don't think they're accurate. I don't think it's reflective of the growth. I think it's much more likely, and we'll get to our economic assumptions when we come later with more details from our fuller budget. But the budget resolution that you all passed, $2.5 trillion, I think the number there was 2.7, is much more accurate in terms of a number that should flow from the policies in the bill.
Great. I would agree. 2.6% is, I think, what the House Budget Committee put forth. I think that's a better estimate. Would you agree that assuming only the 1.8% CBO number both underestimates the positive impact of the legislation and simultaneously overestimates the negative impacts like deficit projections?
Yes, but I would go further. I think the challenge with the CBO score is the way they construct the baseline is they are asking policymakers who care about the debt and deficits to almost take the position that you shouldn't extend the tax relief. And then they don't model the extent to which that would implode the economy.
Yeah.
Like, there's dynamics assumptions with regard to tax policies and economic growth, and then there should also be an area where they model the economic impacts of their own baseline policies.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Bishop for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director Vought. Branding is very important in the characterization of the reconciliation bill, and there are many who are calling it one thing, but there are many others who are characterizing it as the big, ugly bill. I want to talk to you about your proposals relating to USDA research. You eliminate the Hatch Act formula grants, which go to the 1862 land-grant institutions. There's a 44% cut to Evans Allen research grants for the 1890 land-grant institutions and a 14% cut to the 1890 extension services. The Smith-Lever Cooperative Extension Program is cut by 46%. Ag research has been the tool that has kept America ahead of our international competitors for decades, and is right now more important than it ever was in our competition with our international competitors. We're falling behind other nations on ag research, so I strongly believe that research should be the last place that we should be looking at cutting. How do you justify these cuts, other than as part of your overall budget numbers quest, if America is going to continue to be able to produce the highest quality, the safest, the most abundant, the most economic food and fiber anywhere in the world?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I mean, we believe in agricultural research, and I think we believe in the research that even in areas where we're taking cuts, our desire is to make sure that we actually do research, that it's not going to some of the projects and line items that you saw Secretary Rollins put out there that she has canceled. And so where we found efficiencies, and we wanted to make those reflected in the fiscal year 26 budget. But agriculture is incredibly important. We have to be able to feed ourselves first and foremost, and one of the ways that we need to be able to do that is not just our farm support programs, but the extent to which we're thinking ahead and planning for the future and learning.
Thank you.
But there is,
Thank you.
I think in the eye of the beholder, there might be some differences.
Thank you. Currently, my state, Georgia, is the most recent state to implement the Medicaid work reporting requirement. So far, what we've seen is a cautionary tale for other states. Higher administrative costs, increased bureaucratic red tape, and suppressed enrollment, even among eligible Georgians. In my congressional district, over 765,000 Georgians, and almost 17% of them, of the non-elderly residents, are uninsured. However, after 18 months of implementation, less than 1% of our district's residents who are aged 19 to 64 were enrolled in the Georgia version of Georgia's Pathways to Coverage program. That's in spite of the state having spent $92 million in combined state and federal funds on the program, most of which covered administrative expenses like technology upgrades rather than actual health care benefits. In other words, taxpayers are funding for-profit consultants to add on to clunky, outdated systems to process paperwork rather than covering the cost of doctor visits and prescription refills for eligible Georgians. If the budget reconciliation bill mandates work or other community engagement reporting requirements for low-income, able-bodied adults across all states, how can we avoid the high costs, low coverage pitfalls evidenced by Georgia's Pathways to Coverage program? For example, how will the federal government ensure that taxpayer dollars are going to health care benefits rather than more bureaucratic red tape, as we've seen in Georgia? And quickly, the second question is, most of the $92 million that was spent has been covered by the federal government, due in part to the higher federal match for administrative expenses like technology upgrades. This expense would not be necessary if not for the additional paperwork generated by the work reporting requirement. For 1,115 demonstration programs like the Georgia program, what steps have been taken to ensure that states are held accountable to rules regarding budget neutrality if they implement this on the nationwide basis?
Well, thank you for the question. I haven't looked at Georgia's model, and I will look into that. Our belief is that this will not lead to additional paperwork, but that it will build on the historic reforms that we saw in 1997 that were on a bipartisan
There have been
basis.
studies done on it that have been published that have made it very clear. And of course, obviously, the people who are skeptical of that have made that clear also. It's out there. And I'm surprised that you haven't been.
Well, I mean, as it pertains to the 1997 reforms, which now applies the concept of work to Medicaid. And remember, in Medicaid, we have this issue where you have able-bodied working adults that get a higher match than the originally intended beneficiaries, the disabled, the elderly, who, you get $9 for $9 federal dollars for every $1 of state for the able-bodied working adults, and then you
that's
get
correct.
about 1.30 for every one at the lower populations. And that's something that's off, because what you have is states chasing the higher dollar. So with this work requirement, we'll make sure that we have
It means that more
important
money will have
reform.
to go for the states setting up the mechanism in order to calculate that. It's more red tape, more paperwork, less than services and care for the people who need it.
We can
Thank you.
disagree
And
on that.
the chair will now recognize Mr. Cloud for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Vought, for being here. As an American, before being here as a member of Congress, I just want to say thank you for finding efforts to find savings. I know what motivates me and a lot of people in our service here is the really demand that should be upon us to leave a better country than we find it. And so we find ourselves headed to $36 trillion in debt, as you just talked about. We're looking at what's going on in the bond markets. They're really concerned about our debt load. Talked about World War II debt loads during peacetime being a very big concern. Certainly, mandatory spending is a big part of that. But then we also, have understood that as government grows, freedom contracts, and so there's a need as well to make sure that we're turning a good return on investment when it comes to our discretionary funding as well. Could you speak to what we can do to find savings with our discretional funding, especially considering like pre-COVID levels? We're spending what, $2 trillion more a year now, every year, and then we were what, 1.6 trillion in discretionary funding pre-COVID, or I'm sorry, that's after COVID, and then before COVID it was 1.288 trillion in discretionary. That's a pretty substantial growth over just a couple year period of time, and nobody pre-COVID was thinking that we had a lean, mean fighting machine of a federal government. Most people even then thought it was pretty bloated and a little lethargic and could use some tightening up. Could you speak to what we're doing to find savings and return a better return on?
Sure. I mean, it's reflected in our budget proposal. Generally, we proposed $163 billion in non-defense cuts, the lowest level adjusted for inflation since 2000. Not adjusted for inflation, it gets you back to your pre-COVID levels. And we really are trying to find programs that we believe are fundamentally wasteful or divisive. When you're providing $315 million for preschool grants for CRT indoctrination for 4-year-olds in Minnesota, we think that money is not just wasteful, but it's actually harming the country as a whole and those individuals. And we looked at it from every vantage point from that standpoint. It's one of the reasons we talk about the cuts to woke and weaponized bureaucracy and wasteful. And sometimes you just can't afford something when you're $37 trillion in debt that you would otherwise be able to afford. There are drivers that you have in the appropriations process that we pay for. And we pay for the needs that we see for veterans. It almost acts like a mandatory program within your jurisdiction. We have proposals for rental reform to block grant to the states and require a cost share with states so that we don't have people that are too soon moving off these programs into self-sufficiency. That's another driver that you all are facing with that is on your books. It's not a mandatory program, but acts like a mandatory program, and we're trying to account and deal with those with the proposal that we sent up.
I was late to this hearing because I was in the Doge Subcommittee hearing in which we were talking about NGOs that are, we call them NGOs, but many of them have well over 50% of their funding coming from the federal government. One I highlighted was Endeavors, which was a big part of the apparatus, really the industry that stood up to bring illegal immigrants. Over 90% of their funding was coming from the federal government, and they kind of ceased to be an NGO at that point. Can you talk about how you're evaluating these, I would call them quasi-government entities as opposed to an NGO? I think it was over 35,000 of them are getting more federal dollars than they are donations.
I mean, it was a major thrust throughout this process for constructing this budget. And we have our, what we call director's review, and literally we would ask on every program, not just what's the level, what's the need, but how is it distributed. We want to make sure that if this is going to a nonprofit, the extent to which that
It's truly a
nonprofit shares our views and is not putting forward some of the ideologies that we have fundamental issues with. And so I can't give you a rack-up of what we found other than to, in the areas that we put forward cuts, we have concerns in addition to the value proposition of those dollars.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Hanson for a matter of before the.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in light of the conversation earlier, I'd like to submit an article for the record about illegal immigrants receiving coverage on Medicaid. We do know federal dollars flow to states, and this is from the New York Times, May 14th, 2025. Governor Newsom proposes scaling back health care for undocumented immigrants in California. I'd like to submit this article for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection. We have a limited amount of time. I noticed that in which we can maybe go to a lightning round. I'm sure Mr. Ivey's salivating for the chance for his lightning round. And so we could pick your top question that you wanted to ask and try to keep it to 2 minutes. That will get everybody a chance and in order to be fair to everyone here. Fair enough?
I will certainly defer to my elders here, so.
Well, we're looking forward to another 2-minute lecture. I will take the liberty of going first then. The ITOR account was established back in 2015. The ITOR funds currently being used for both Doge Federal Workforce and Software Initiative. What is the breakdown or percentage of Doge funds that have been used for workforce issues, and what percentage of ITOR funds are being used to modernize technology? And further, your request for this year for ITOR, it's an increase of 145%. And I was wondering if you could tell us, is this for software modernization initiative or the 30 full-time equivalents that you've asked for sought under the budget request for ITOR specifically, or for the software initiative, or for Doge too?
The ITOR request in fiscal year '26 is for Doge. We put it in the ITOR account because we are still in movement as to where Doge resides, and the fact that we have opportunities through standard USDS work to do technological work at the agencies. So I wouldn't call it a plug, but we are certainly reflective of the fact that there's good work to be done regardless of whether Doge is fundamentally housed in the EOP or at the agencies long-term.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Mr. Hoyer for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm at 5:17 already. Am I over? Tell me when we're ready.
You're good.
I am against dynamic scoring, not because I don't believe there is a dynamic score, but because I think it is a gamble. And one of the reasons we've gotten to places where we are is because it's been a gamble. I've been here a long time, as you know. When Ronald Reagan's David Stockman said, tax cut's going to pay for itself. Ronald Reagan increased the deficit. Only one man can stop spending, or one person, the President of the United States, by 189%. Mick Mulvaney told us that the Bush tax cut would pay for itself. And Mitch Daniels also told us, Mick Mulvaney was Trump's, that Bush's tax cut would pay for itself. They didn't do it. And we ran deficits. And we ran deficits, the only one that really had a low deficit was Bill Clinton, and a balanced budget, as you probably recall. Now, the budget you've now said, we've had a lot of talk about Doge. Mr. Musk, of course, headed up Doge and was regaled as somebody who was a genius and could do everything. He said this, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it." So that at least one person that has been high up in this administration, who being worth $450 billion, is prepared to tell the truth. This bill is not going to pay for it itself. And we are not honest with one another. The discretionary part of the budget, which you said 30%. Defense, veterans, Homeland Security, take it far above that. So we deal with 14 or 13% of the budget to try to balance the budget. That's dishonest. It cannot be done if you eliminated all of non-defense, non-veteran discretionary funding. So David Stockman ended up with a book said, "We lied." I hope you won't do that.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Womack for his lightning round question.
Director Vought, you got a tough job. You got a tough job. You inherited an absolute mess, a mess that's been created over decades, not just one administration, but many. It's because Congress can't say no. But we've seen the big, beautiful bill slammed in here in this hearing today. I want to give you a second to tell us what's going to happen if H.R. 1 fails, if whatever comes back from the Senate fails to get to the desk of the president and signed into law, what happens at the end of this year?
I think we'll have a recession. I think we will be, economic storm clouds will be very dark. I think we'll have a 60% tax increase on the American people. And just to, if I could answer Congressman Hoyer's question or statement, the notion that this bill, I mean, we've been actually criticized unfairly for, on the reconciliation bill for the fact that it is all mandatory savers. I mean, you said, look, we need to address the mandatory side of the house. There's $1.7 trillion in mandatory savers on the reconciliation bill. Do we need to do things on the appropriation side, the discretionary side? Yes, that's what we're here to talk about with rescissions and the bill that we've, the budget that we've sent up to you. But we have to get back to what we did in 1997, where we had for the first time substantial mandatory reforms around not just cutting people and just getting people off programs, but reforms, a work requirement. We're using the same model that Bill Clinton signed into law, and we think it will have incredible impact on not just these programs, but giving people dignity of work. And we're not going to be ashamed by that, but we do need to explain ourselves to those that are being impacted by the watchdogs in this town that honestly don't have an incentive to get a bill done. They have chosen how they want to frame bills, and I think they're inaccurate.
I appreciate your response. Thank you so much. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, if you don't pass the $4.5 trillion tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the country and the biggest corporations. To my friends who was gone now about the Constitution, read the Constitution. And there are many Republicans who have said that they haven't read the bill, and they're troubled by what's in this big, ugly bill that you're discussing. Let me just talk about empowerment. You speak about a tradition in this country, which is in fact fiction. You say over 200 years, presidential empowerment has carrying the day for all of you. You think you're so captured by the lie that you founded a multi-million-dollar think tank to republish the lie. I'm familiar with this work. The quality of the work is so bad. And let me just say, to characterize it, this is page after page, going back to 1789 of what people looked at in terms of impounding or stealing funds. And let's just tell this, that even in your fake history, almost all the examples that you document demonstrate that presidents have historically only delayed or refused to spend money when it was the Congress who gave them the power to do it. It's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. That is operative. There should be no debate. You have impounded and stolen funds that you have no business doing. You don't have that authority. The president doesn't have that inherent authority. And it has been documented by the courts, which is why over 250 lawsuits that have been filed, 185 plus rulings have paused Trump initiatives. You are in violation of the law. That is what we should be dealing with in this effort. Would you recommit yourself to the truth? Engaging with this committee, the American people, and the American people based on the respect for history as it actually has occurred.
We haven't impounded any money. We're under programmatic review of federal dollars across the
You
nation.
have impounded money, $425 billion.
We don't know where
has
that
been
number came
frozen.
from other than
I'll
you,
tell you,
Congresswoman.
look at the tracker. You know, we're following it very closely. And I would just say this, if people don't really want to appropriate and hold on to the power of the purse, then my suggestion is find another committee to sit on. Our responsibility is to make sure that we maintain that power of the purse and that what we say has got to be congressionally spent needs to be. And you do have a premise that in that bill, in the Empowerment Control Act, that allows you to come up with a rescission package. But what is at stake is the illegality of what you have done with impounding and stealing funds from the American public and the unbelievable consequences it will have on their lives and their families' lives.
Congressman,
Chair-
there's nothing
The chair now
improper-
recognizes Ms. Henson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think fundamentally there is a difference of viewpoint on this committee. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem in this country. And some of these examples that you have showcased today, Director Vought, the PEPFAR examples you gave earlier, we want to see those dollars go to programs and people who need them. That's the whole point of what our committee is doing here, is asking those questions. And when I hear about the waste, that's exactly what Iowans are telling me to come here and say, we don't want to spend our money on that. So kudos to you, to Doge, for everything you've done to uncover this. At least $175 billion in wasteful spending already, throwing away this money on international pet projects instead of going to constituents like mine in the district. I think it's abominable, and we shouldn't be allowing it. The administration has discovered $300 million of SBA loans that have gone out to individuals under the age of 11, $300 million over the age of 120. The youngest recipient of an SBA loan is a 9-month-old. How does that even happen? Sounds like it's a rhetorical question, but the previous administration allowed it to happen. So how does it happen?
Well, I think one of the things that Doge brought to this was a ability to think anew about something and look at it without having had the opportunity to be in this town and be up to speed on all the acronyms, to look at it just flat out. What's the value proposition of what's ongoing here, and what's the process by how it moves through the federal bureaucracy? And they thankfully had the ability to be outraged, and I think that's what the American people are outraged by, is the extent to which taxpayer dollars are spent on things that no one wants to defend. No one pushed back on the examples that I gave with regard to PEPFAR. No one wants to defend that. We may disagree as to whether that's the level of waste or whether that deserves a programmatic cut, but on a bipartisan basis, it's collectively outrageous. You go to any diner in the country, in every town in the country, and you present these examples, and it will be outrageous. And I think that's what Doge brought to us. And many of us had been in these salt mines for many years. And I think I can't explain why this town needs that dose of reality, but it unfortunately does, and I'm thankful that this administration is giving it.
Yeah, keep peeling back the layers of the onion. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. Chair now recognizes Mr. Pocan for his lightning round question. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Ms. Hinson for putting in the record to verify what I said, which is undocumented immigrants are not eligible to enroll in federally funded coverage, including Medicaid, CHIP, or Medicare, or to purchase coverage through the ACA marketplaces. And in California, indeed, it was state funds. So thank you, Ms. Hinson, for having my back. I love bipartisan cooperation. Project 2025, you're one of the authors. You're on the advisory board. You work for Heritage. You're basically January, February, and March in a Project 2025 calendar, right? But you were asked this weekend about it, and you said, no, the administration isn't following Project 2025. So I'll go through lightning rounds since I only have 2 minutes. Just tell me, coincidence or not. In the Project 25, abolishing Department of Education, you guys are doing that. Is that a coincidence?
The president's view
Coincidence
and
or
agenda,
not?
the
Just
president's
coincidence or not? That's all you got to
president's
ask.
agenda
Okay,
is
I'll go
being
through the
followed.
rest. Any diversity, equity, and inclusion?
The president's agenda is being
Shifting
followed.
FEMA costs to the states?
The
Targeting
president designs
PBS
his
and the
agenda.
National Public Radio?
President
Freezing
designs.
federal assistance? Restricting gender-affirming care? Revoking security clearances? Stripping civil servants of employment protections, reinstating service members who refuse COVID-19 vaccines, banning transgender people from the military, a hiring freeze, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, sending active duty troops to the southern border, limiting refugee admissions, rescinding temporary protected status designations, capping indirect costs for university-based research, requiring disclosures of foreign gifts to universities, apparently not planes to presidents, asserting the president's power to remove federal officials, and targeting NOAA. Were those all just coincidences that they happened to be in Project 25 and they were just in the back pocket of the president since November?
The president has never been more of a promises made, promises kept president than we've ever had in history. He has run on an agenda. He was very clear on that agenda. He's now enacting that agenda. And those of us who work for him work for his agenda in executing that agenda.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Alford.
Point of order before my time begins. Chair, how much time do we actually have in this lightning round?
2 minutes.
One question, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, thank you. Let's start. For my ag state of Missouri, renewable fuel standards, renewable volume obligations rule has been at OMB since May. First, when will this be sent back to the EPA to release publicly, sir?
We're working on it. We know it's a priority. It's part of an annual process that's very, very important.
Second question, a follow-up on PEPFAR. We've talked about it a little bit. PEPFAR, since 2003, has saved about 26 million lives, mainly in Africa. Aside from the crazy woke programs, which I agree should be stripped, is there any other prevention program, not treatment, but prevention program listed in this rescission package, which is not of a woke nature?
We believe that life-saving treatment, I understand that is in fact your question, but we are scaling down the program as it pertains to the types of organizations that are providing, are the examples of the waste, fraud, and abuse. The prevention itself is where an analytical look needs to be done, and it's one of the reasons why we have emphasized in successive budgets that we're going to protect life-saving treatment, but we want to scrutinize heavily those that are bringing people into the
But do you
system and the nonprofit.
do you see where I'm going with this, sir? I mean, there's life-saving treatment after you already have HIV, but there are prevention programs that PEPFAR does, which are not of the woke nature, which can prevent someone from getting HIV. Are those programs going to survive?
It is something that our budget will be very trim on because we believe that many of these nonprofits are not geared towards the viewpoints of the administration. And we're $37 trillion in debt.
I know.
Again, so at some point, the continent of Africa needs to absorb more of the burden of providing
I agree
this
with
health
you.
care.
In fact, I have a plan, a 5-year plan, to scale down our commitment from the U.S. to put that on the backs of those in Africa and those in charities and churches. This is a temporary program. It's not to be sustained forever by American taxpayers. Thank you, sir.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Ivy for his 2-minute question, statement, or whatever.
All of the above, maybe, I don't know. But my colleague there, made me think of Bill Gates's quote. He just said, the wealthiest man in the world is basically killing the poorest kids in the world by making these cuts. And you're sort of executing that. I appreciate the comment that was made there, but we really can't sugarcoat this. More people are going to die. And if I think I heard what you said there, prevention's going to get less funding than it currently is. And I think in every model, prevention is better than trying to cure it after a disease is contracted. But, real quick on this, the merit hiring plan, which I saw one of the questions, I think it was question number 3. Identify 1 or 2 relevant executive orders or policy initiatives that are significant to you and explain how you would help implement them if hired. And I read that and I was like, well, I don't know that every president is going to be issuing 50 executive orders per day. So if it's just a commitment to do what follow one of President Trump's executive orders, I think that's totally inappropriate. And I think there's a lot of positions that we need to fill in the federal government, like some of the science and engineering jobs I mentioned a few minutes ago. I don't really care if they're reading the president's executive orders per se. I'm more curious, I care more about them curing cancer or addressing Alzheimer's, or if they're federal agents tracking down Sinaloa cartel or identifying and tracking down the waste, fraud, and abuse that's actually occurring by major malfactors, or the competition with our adversaries abroad. So I see my 2 minutes are running out. I do want to say this. I just noticed, I saw this up here, and it matches the T-shirts in the audience. To the labor community out there, stay strong. Keep
Thank you very
working hard.
much.
We
The
appreciate
chair now
your work.
recognizes Mr. Cloud for his question. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate you being here. As I've looked at Doge and the work that's going on, I've been surprised really from the vitriol from the left. There's a video that's gone around of President Obama basically describing the work of Doge and putting it to Joe Biden to take charge of it. Of course, we didn't see any nationwide injunctions to anything that they did. I'm not sure if that's because they didn't do anything, it was ineffective. But now we see things coming to light that really questions we've asked and tried to get from appropriation standpoint. We had asked the bureaucracy, where's these dollars really going to? And we couldn't get the answers. We had an administration that wouldn't work with us, and finally we have one that's not only that willing to work with us, but able to bring technology tools to the table to get it done. Appreciated what you said in light of, when I go home and I talk about Medicaid and the fact that more than half the people on Medicaid are above the poverty line, and what you discussed about we're incentivizing people to stay out of the workforce in order to receive Medicaid in many of these states, they become very much for once they understand what's going on and what the real target is, that we're actually protecting this and preserving it for the disabled and not attacking that. It just seems well within what we need to do in order to back off the 36 trillion. So thank you for your work on that. I had one question in the little bit of time I had. Someone mentioned that dynamic scoring was kind of like asking the CBO. It was to score with dynamic scoring was kind of a gamble. I would submit that asking the CBO to do a score is a bit of a big gamble because their accuracy has been so off. And I would ask if the administration would support, I have a piece of legislation for the CBO to have to include interest cost in their scoring. And then I know Warren Davidson has one on show your work, which they don't do. If the administration would support that.
It's a good idea. I'm happy to take a look at it and run it through our process to see what the president would think on it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The historical record is clear that the president doesn't have inherent power to refuse to spend funds appropriated by Congress. And for an accurate historical record of this fact, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the documentation that supports my claim about the myth of presidential impoundment power.
Object.
Not asking for a statement, but without objection, we'll take it in the record.
Thank you, and I also might want to add to the gentleman who just spoke, 39% of the children in this
Well,
nation get their
no more
health
statements, thank you. With that, our time is concluded. I'd like to thank Director Vought for having been here today. And, I know sometimes you didn't have a chance to finish that. I'm glad to give you, since you have 1 minute left, 1 minute to close out, or you're free to leave. It's up to you.
I'm all good. I appreciate all of the comments, whether I disagreed with them or not, and look forward to a follow-up with the committee.
Thank you very much. There may be some members who would like to submit questions for the records. Please submit any questions for the record to the subcommittee staff within 7 days. I please ask everyone to stay in their seats and allow the director to leave. And then as he gets out of the room there, then we'll move. Thank you very much. With that, this subcommittee is adjourned.